The vampire women walked, the animals silent around them, like living shadows. When they needed to attack, the wolves accompanied them to the places where unsuspecting humans lit campfires at the forest's edge or ventured into the darkness in search of game. There were no screams. The attack was swift and precise, a deadly ballet where wolves and vampires worked as a single entity. The howl of the wolves blended with the whisper of the wind, creating a melody that proclaimed the rebirth of something dark. Each vampire shaped herself into the new role that eternal power had bestowed upon her. Some became relentless hunters, guided by thirst. Others, more introspective, dedicated themselves to exploring the limits of their new abilities, experimenting with the extent of their powers, both physical and mental. The wolves became more than hunting companions. They were loyal guardians. They patrolled the boundaries of the territory, their golden eyes glowing like torches in the darkness. No intruder dared cross the vampire's domain without facing the wrath of the wolves. And if any wandering human were foolish enough to approach, their presence was quickly silenced, leaving only the sound of the forest to mask the traces of their existence. Under the moonlight, the vampires and their wolves moved as one. They were no longer lost women. They were sovereigns of a new world, eternal predators who had found in the night the home the day had denied them. As the wind howled through the trees and the wolves raised their voices to the stars, the vampires smiled, knowing they had claimed absolute dominion over the forest and everything within it. Under the vast expanse of the night sky, where the moon reigned supreme, the vampire women walked through the forest. Their steps were light, almost imperceptible, but their presence resonated in every shadow. Around them, wolves emerged like specters of the night itself, moving with grace and ferocity, forming a circle of silent guardians. They were not subjugated creatures, but allies answering a deeper, almost ancestral call. The connection between them and the wolves was inexplicable, a bond that transcended words or reason. There was a tacit understanding, as if they shared something beyond the blood that pulsed in their immortal bodies or the wild instinct that guided the packs. The vampires, with their aura of power and mystery, drew the wolves as the moon draws the tides, but the attraction was not one of submission. It was a silent pact, a balance between two forces of the night. The wolves, their eyes glowing like embers, walked beside them, attuned to every movement, every whisper of the forest. They seemed to understand the essence of the women, the hunger that consumed them and the loneliness that enveloped them. In return, the vampires respected the wolves' wild freedom, knowing that this alliance was fragile yet powerful. There were moments when the silence of the forest was broken by a howl, a sound that sliced through the darkness like a blade. This call, deep and primal, echoed in the hearts of the vampires, awakening something they barely understood themselves. It was as if the wolves were mirrors of the part of them that still yearned for freedom, even as they embraced eternity. When the vampires hunted, the wolves followed at a distance, like protective shadows. They observed with patient predation, intervening only when necessary. And on nights of danger, when other predators crossed their paths, the wolves became fierce defenders, their sharp fangs gleaming in the moonlight as they protected their immortal allies. Their coexistence was not without tension. The wolves, with their untamed nature, tested the patience of the vampires, while the vampires, with their calculated control, challenged the strength of the wolves. Yet in the end, there was mutual respect. The vampires saw in the wolves the strength they had lost when they abandoned mortality, while the wolves recognized in the vampires the determination and power born of eternity. On the quieter nights when the wind whispered softly through the trees, the vampires sat in clearings, the wolves lying around them like a loyal guard. There was something almost sacred in these moments, a perfect balance between the serenity and the danger they both embodied. The golden eyes of the wolves met the glowing eyes of the vampires, and for an instant, it seemed as though nothing else existed but that silent bond beneath the stars. This relationship was unique, a delicate dance between the wild and the immortal, between the raw strength of nature and the cold control of eternity. And even though no words were spoken, the vampires knew that as long as the wolves stood by their side, they would not be completely alone in the darkness. It was a bond that defied time, forged not by blood or contract, but by a profound understanding that, in the night, all predators find a reflection of themselves. The relationship between the vampire women and the wolves seemed like something woven by destiny itself, a bond that, even in the face of loss and conflict, only grew stronger with the passing nights. In the vastness of the forest, where the darkness seemed alive and pulsating, the two species coexisted as parts of a strange yet unbreakable equilibrium. The vampires, with their enigmatic and supernatural presence, were more than leaders to the wolves. They were like pillars around which the pack found purpose, a source of magnetism that attracted and united the wild spirits. The understanding between them went beyond words, beyond logic. On nights when the full moon shone its brightest, the connection between them seemed more intense. The vampires walked among the wolves, their cold fingers running through thick fur, while the creature's eyes rose to meet theirs with absolute respect. It was a silent ritual, a moment of mutual recognition that reinforced the alliance. The wolves entrusted their instincts to the vampires, and the vampires, in return, offered the protection of their immortal strength. In battle, when arrows pierced the air or blades gleamed under the moonlight, the vampires were the first to advance, protecting the wolves as if they were part of themselves. Often they faced danger with a ferocity that even their enemies found astonishing. When a wolf was wounded, the vampires, even amid chaos, found ways to care for them, whether by removing an embedded spear or holding back threats so the injured could recover. In moments of calm, they shared more than just the night. The vampires often sat on mossy stones or at the base of ancient trees, while the wolves relaxed, rested around them. In their shared silences, there was something almost sacred, a wordless pact that grew stronger with every synchronized breath. Over time, the bonds between vampires and wolves became so deep that it seemed impossible to imagine one without the other. The wolves learned to decipher the intentions of the vampires, responding to the subtlest gestures or silent glances. The vampires, in turn, recognized in the wolves a loyalty no alliance with humans had ever offered them. When a vampire raised her eyes to the moon, she often found the gaze of a wolf fixed on the same celestial body. In that moment, it didn't matter whether they were creatures of flesh or immortality. There was a mutual understanding that they belonged to the night, to the forest, and to each other. Even with the losses that nocturnal life brought, even with the blood that so often stained the earth beneath their feet, the bond between vampires and wolves never broke. On the contrary, every healed wound, every battle won, and every shared grief only united them further. They and their wolves were children of the darkness, parts of a balance that could not be broken, as enduring as the eternity the vampires carried in their hearts. The vampire women walked beneath the pale light of the moon, their slender silhouettes intertwined with the shadows of the trees. Despite their immortality and eternal hunger, there was a profound bond between them and nature, as though the very forest recognized and accepted them. They were predators but also guardians, figures who, though feared, were part of the balance of the wild. The trees whispered to the wind as if in conversation with them. Every leaf seemed to bow slightly at their passing, and the roots beneath their feet pulsed with an energy only they could sense. It was not merely a physical connection, but a spiritual one. The vampires felt the earth's pulse, the slow and steady rhythm that guided nocturnal creatures. The land seemed to murmur ancient secrets, and they, in their contemplative silence, listened. When they moved through the dense woods, the animals did not immediately flee. Owls watched them from high branches, their heads turning in silent curiosity. Deer observed them from afar, alert but not terrified. There was something in their presence that was not entirely threatening, something that nature recognized as familiar, though dangerous. On rainy nights, when clouds veiled the stars, the vampires remained under the open sky, allowing the water to cascade down their pale faces. They felt each drop as a reminder of the life they had left behind, but also as a promise of eternity. The scent of wet earth was a balm, something that tethered them to the physical world, a world they could never fully abandon, even as creatures of the beyond. There were times when the vampires paused by rivers, their eyes fixed on the dark waters reflecting the forest contours. There, they felt the vital force of the unceasing flow, the eternal cycle carrying both the promise of renewal and the inevitability of destruction. They would immerse their hands in the currents, as if trying to absorb a fragment of that pulsating energy. A reminder that, despite their immortality, they were still part of a greater whole. Hidden caves, covered in moss and guarded by cascading waterfalls, became their sanctuaries. Within these spaces, they found a peace that eternity rarely allowed. It was there they could hear the mountain's heart, the muffled and rhythmic sound echoing through the stones. In those depths, far from the eyes of the living, the vampires permitted themselves a moment of true stillness, as though the earth's core offered them a solace nothing else could. Even the night sky, with its infinite stars, seemed to be part of their essence. The vampires often gazed upward, captivated by the vastness that seemed to mirror their own existence. Their immortality made them feel small in the face of the cosmos's grandeur, but also inseparably connected to it. They felt as tied to the stars as they were to the roots of the trees, as if the entire universe was an extension of their very being. They were guardians of ancient secrets, daughters of both darkness and earth. Nature accepted them not because they were pure, but because they were necessary, a fundamental part of its balance. The vampires, in their eternal search for meaning, found in nature something that blood and immortality could never provide. A home, a place where, despite their shadows, they could exist as part of something greater, something eternal, as deep as the roots of the trees and as vast as the starry sky. Not all women who crossed the threshold between mortality and immortality were prepared for the darkness that awaited them. For those newly turned, the lack of experience was a heavy chain, dragging them into the depths of their own vulnerability. Without a guide to lead them, many became easy prey for the living, who, as fragile as they were, knew how to protect their lives when fear turned into courage. These fledgling vampires, dazzled by their newfound power, often underestimated the dangers lurking around them. They emerged into the night as predators who had yet to learn to hunt, relying solely on their instincts, still clumsy and confused. Their hunger frequently drove them to fatal mistakes, attacking in well-lit places or choosing prey whose absence would quickly be noticed. Without the wisdom of a mentor, they failed to understand that immortality was not an absolute shield. They believed themselves invincible, ignoring the whispers of the forest, the watchful eyes and the calculated movements of humans who, in secret, knew the legends about them. Thus they fell into rudimentary traps, underestimating the ingenuity of those who sought to eliminate them. Some believed their newfound strength made them superior to any threat. They ventured too close to villages, drawn by the lights and sounds of life, forgetting that humans, even with hearts pounding in fear, knew how to act when cornered. In these moments, improvised spears and blazing torches became deadly weapons, and the pride of inexperienced vampires turned into their downfall. Others, unable to control their thirst, left obvious trails of destruction. Their attacks drew attention, and soon organized hunters began tracking them. Unaware of the dangers of exposure, many did not realize they were being watched until it was too late. Surrounded and lacking the skill to fight or escape, they met a premature end, their immortal lives cut short before they truly began. There were also those who succumbed to loneliness. Without guidance, immortality became a heavy burden. Isolated, they wandered through forests, avoiding any contact until hunger or despair led them to irreparable mistakes. In their vulnerability, they were captured, their stories ending in silence, forgotten by all. Those who survived long enough to grasp the risks learned the hard way, through the pain of loss of companions, of shelters, of their own identity. Each mistake became a lesson etched into the eternity of their existence. Some managed to find a mentor later, someone to teach them the ways of the darkness. Others, however, vanished before they ever had a chance to learn, becoming mere memories in the vastness of the night. The forest, indifferent as always, bore silent witness to these tragedies. The wind carried muffled cries, the ground absorbed spilled blood, and the moon shone impassively upon the scenes of destruction. The vampires who endured learned to heed these whispered warnings, remembering those who did not survive. It was a constant reminder that, though immortality had been granted to them, it was not guaranteed. Only those who learned to navigate the darkness with care and wisdom could survive the claws of humanity and the perils of their own inexperience. Although immortality brought them power and an existence far beyond the bounds of mortality, the vampires discovered, as centuries passed, that even eternity carried its losses. When a companion fell, it wasn't merely a physical absence that lingered, but an invisible scar etched into their spirit. The death of a sister of the darkness was a cruel reminder that not even nocturnal creatures were immune to pain. The bond between them wasn't merely one of coexistence, it was a connection forged through the sharing of endless nights, secrets whispered under the moon's veil, and battles fought side by side. They shared the burden of insatiable hunger, the anguish of abandoning their human lives, and the loneliness that came with eternity. Losing a companion was losing part of that bond, as if a piece of their very essence had been torn away, left to bleed into the cold earth. Vampires did not mourn as mortals did, but their grief was expressed in gestures and silences. One might be found standing still at the place where her companion had fallen, unmoving, like a statue carved by the night. Another might wander aimlessly through the forest, her steps echoing in an irregular rhythm, unable to find rest. There were those who, in their fury, hunted down the ones responsible for the loss, driven by a vengeance that burned hotter than any hunger. But mourning also brought an inevitable lesson. They learned in the bitterest of ways that not all battles could be won, and that eternity demanded sacrifices. Each loss made them more cautious, more aware that their strength was not invincible, and that immortality came at a price. The surviving vampires bore the memory of their fallen companions as a burden, but also as a constant reminder of their hidden fragility beneath the veil of power. On quiet nights, when the moon shone solitary in the sky, it wasn't uncommon to find a vampire sitting by a riverbank or beneath the shadow of an ancient tree. In those moments, she seemed smaller, almost human in her melancholy. Fingers traced patterns in the earth or the water, as if seeking a connection to the companion who was no longer by her side. These silent vigils often became rituals, a way to keep the memory of the departed alive. Loss was not only pain, it was transformation. Each absence shaped the survivors, strengthening them in some ways but also leaving scars that never faded. Eternity did not offer forgetfulness. On the contrary, it ensured that every memory, every wound, was preserved as part of the price they had been paying since the moment of their transformation. And so, even as they continued their existence in the darkness, the vampires carried with them the echoes of their lost companions. The whispers of those who had fallen still resonated in the trees, in the wind, in the shadows. Every step forward was taken with the weight of a memory, but also with the determination to honor those who were no longer there. After all, it was through this shared pain that they understood the true meaning of eternity. Not living endlessly, but living without forgetting. Despite having found refuge in the depths of the forest and establishing their dominion among the shadows, the vampires began to feel an unease that disturbed even their newly immortal existence. It was a silent yet irresistible call, seeming to emanate from far beyond the trees and mountains. It wasn't a voice, nor a sound, but a deep pulse, like the echo of something ancient whispering directly into their minds. Something was calling to them, something powerful, and none of them could ignore it. The sensation was as visceral as the hunger that had once nearly driven them mad. It was as if their bodies, now free from mortal limitations, were being drawn by a force beyond comprehension, a force that promised answers to questions they didn't even know they had. There was a familiarity in the call, but also a mystery. What or who was calling them? An ally, an enemy, or something far beyond either? They gathered at the foot of an ancient tree, its canopy veiling the moon like a shroud. The wolves surrounded them in silence, sensing the imminent change. No words were spoken, for they all knew what they needed to do. The forest, with all its vastness and secrets, was no longer enough. The promise of the unknown pushed them beyond what they had once considered their domain. Their departure was not a farewell, but an inevitable transition. The wolves, loyal to the end, followed them, moving like living shadows as the vampires crossed the boundaries of their territory for the first time since their transformation. The wind felt different beyond the forest, carrying unfamiliar scents and energies, but also the confirmation that the call grew stronger with every step they took. The world beyond the trees revealed itself as vast and strange. Open plains stretched under the silver light, and distant mountains rose like walls against the horizon. Each step took them further from the home they had built, but also closer to the source of that enigmatic call. Though they didn't know the exact destination, they felt that every movement was guided by a force they could not comprehend and dared not question. During the journey, their immortal senses sharpened even further. They could feel time flowing differently, as if the universe itself conspired to drive them forward. The nights grew more intense, and the days, though they remained hidden from the light, brought vivid dreams filled with visions they could not fully understand. Nebulous silhouettes, towers that touched the skies, and an ancient power that seemed to call to them, not just for what they had become, but for what they could be. The landscape shifted as they advanced. Dense forests gave way to windswept fields, and the stars above seemed brighter and closer, as if they too were watching their journey. The wolves stayed vigilant, but there was no sign of danger. It was as though the world itself respected their passage, recognizing in them the mark of something that transcended mortality. The vampires, united in purpose, felt the distance between themselves and what called them grow smaller. With each passing night, the call grew stronger, clearer, like a drumbeat marking the rhythm of their steps. They didn't know how long it would take or what they would find at the end. But there was no hesitation. The forest had been a home, but it was not their final destination. The call was a promise, a challenge, an opportunity, and guided by darkness and the pull of the unknown, they pressed on, determined to unravel the mystery awaiting them on the horizon.